So there I was, 14 years old, 5 foot nothing, and staring at what had to be the galaxy's most impressive monument to terrible life choices. Galactic Academy Station Omega 7 hung in space like a chrome and crystal nightmare, all gleaming surfaces and impossible angles that hurt your brain if you look too long. The brochure called it the premier interspecies educational facility. I called it the place where small humans go to die. My name's Jake Martinez, and I was about to become the newest victim at what was essentially Hogwarts, except instead of wizards, it was full of creatures that could bench press a Honda Civic. My parents thought it would be character building to attend the most prestigious school in the galaxy. They were right, if by character building they meant learning how to hide in increasingly creative places. The admissions tour started badly and went downhill from there. Our guide was this cheerful blob creature named Glixen, who kept saying things like, "And here's where the crystalline students store their shed mineral layers," while gesturing at what looked like a wall of discarded diamonds. I was still processing that when he opened a locker and casually mentioned, "These are designed for our silicon-based students, very spacious." That should have been my first clue. By lunch on my first day, I'd already been stuffed into one of those spacious lockers by a gang of what I can only describe as angry, praying mantises with superiority complexes. Apparently, the fact that I breathed oxygen instead of methane made me biologically inferior. The lock mechanism was designed for creatures with crystalline appendages, so I spent 20 minutes trying to pick it with a cafeteria spoon before a janitor found me. The janitor, by the way, was a sentient gas cloud who communicated through color changes. I'm pretty sure it was laughing at me, because it kept flashing what looked suspiciously like the universal color for pathetic human child. Then came the lunch money incident. On Earth, bullies take your lunch money. Here they take your lunch money in galactic credits, your emergency transport fund in Zephyrian crystal chips, and your communication allowance in quantum ducats. I didn't even know I had quantum ducats until someone with too many teeth and not enough moral guidance explained their new ownership structure. But the real kicker was the paperwork incident. See, my mom is what you might charitably call thorough when it comes to documentation. She'd filled out approximately 17,000 forms to get me into this place, including some emotional support animal authorization that she'd somehow gotten approved by what had to be the galaxy's most overworked and under-caffeinated bureaucracy. The form asked for small companion animal for psychological stability and emotional regulation. Mom had written honey badger in her neat handwriting and submitted it, along with a medical report from our family doctor explaining how Buster helped with my anxiety and adjustment challenges. Which was technically true if you considered the knowledge that I had a honey badger on my side, a form of anxiety management. The alien administrators had apparently seen small Earth mammal and emotional support and rubber-stamped it faster than you could say interspecies diplomatic incident. They'd probably never heard of honey badgers. Most humans hadn't heard of honey badgers until they became internet famous for being nature's middle finger to the concept of self-preservation. So there I was, 3 days into my galactic education, nursing a bruised ego and several actual bruises, when I got the message that my emotional support animal had cleared quarantine and was ready for pickup. I almost felt bad for what was about to happen to this place. Almost. But first, let me properly introduce you to the reason I needed emotional support in the first place. His name was Crax, and imagine, if you will, what would happen if a Tyrannosaurus Rex went to business school, developed anger management issues, and decided that high school was the perfect place to work through his daddy issues. Crax stood 12 feet tall on his hind legs, which was his preferred position because it let him literally look down on everyone else. His scales were this lovely shade of "I will end you" green, and his teeth were arranged in what could generously be called a smile, if you'd never seen a smile before, and someone had described one to you very badly. He was a saurid, which was basically the galaxy's way of saying, "We took your worst dinosaur nightmares and gave them opposable thumbs and a college education." The guy ruled the school through a combination of casual violence and psychological warfare that would have impressed a medieval warlord. I'd watched him pick up a Zephyrin student, who was basically a walking crystal formation, and use them as a back-scratcher. The Zephyrian had thanked him afterward. That's the kind of dominance we were dealing with. Crax didn't work alone, of course. He had what I like to call the terror twins, though they weren't actually twins, or even the same species. First was Zilf, a nebula who looked like someone had inflated a jellyfish and taught it to hover menacingly. Zilf provided air support, literally floating above confrontations and dropping what I can only assume were nebular insults down on Crax's victims. The translation software couldn't handle most of what Zilf said, but the tone came through crystal clear. Then there was Mordak, and I want you to understand that when I say this guy was built like a rock, I mean, he was literally made of rocks. He was a granite-class lithoid, which meant he was essentially a walking geological formation with an attitude problem. He served as Crack's muscle, despite the fact that Crack's was already 12 feet of pure muscle with a sociology minor. I'd tried every human solution in the book. Reasoning didn't work, because Crack's idea of debate was seeing how many logical fallacies he could commit while using you as a stress ball. Hiding was impossible when half the student body was either trying to curry favor with him or too terrified to help. I'd attempted to form an alliance of fellow victims, but it turned out that most species had their own versions of every creature for themselves when a 12-foot carnivore was involved. The breaking point came on my 4th day, when Crack's decided that my lunch looked particularly appetizing. Now, human food was apparently considered a delicacy in some parts of the galaxy, which I discovered when Crack's grabbed my peanut butter sandwich and examined it like it was some kind of exotic artifact. "Tiny human brings tiny food for tiny problems," he said, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. The translation was probably cleaned up for my benefit. I made the mistake of trying to explain that the sandwich was specifically prepared for human dietary requirements, and that sharing food between species could cause digestive issues. Crack's response was to eat the entire thing in one bite, then pat me on the head hard enough to give me a mild concussion. That's when I decided that traditional conflict resolution was off the table. It was time for some Earth-style problem-solving, the kind that came with claws, attitude, and absolutely zero regard for the established social order. Because in approximately 18 hours my mom was going to arrive with Buster, and Buster had never met a problem he couldn't solve through aggressive negotiation and strategic face-biting. I spent that evening in my dorm room, writing what I thought might be my last will and testament, and trying to figure out how to warn an entire space station that they were about to meet their match in a 30-pound package of concentrated fury. My mom arrived the next morning in a cloud of bureaucratic efficiency and maternal concern. Linda Martinez was 5 foot 2 inches of pure organizational terror, the kind of woman who could negotiate peace treaties and optimize supply chains while simultaneously making sure you'd eaten enough vegetables. She'd somehow managed to fast-talk her way through 3 different species immigration protocols and was carrying what looked like enough paperwork to deforest a small planet. "Jake, honey, I brought Buster," she announced cheerfully, as if she'd brought me a care package instead of a weaponized furry psychopath. The quarantine officers were so helpful. They kept saying how manageable he seemed. I looked at the carrier she was holding, and I could see Buster inside, sitting calmly and looking around with what I recognized as his assessment mode expression. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like a slightly oversized ferret with a bad attitude. The little vest he was wearing said "Emotional Support Animal" in multiple languages, including what I was pretty sure was Galactic Standard. The alien administrators had gathered to witness this momentous occasion, probably expecting some kind of ceremony involving a cute Earth pet. There was Dean Vorthak, whose species looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a filing cabinet, Assistant Administrator Quelex, who resembled a very polite cactus with social anxiety, and about 12 other officials who'd apparently never seen Earth documentation before and were treating this like an anthropological expedition. "The paperwork indicates this creature provides emotional stability," Dean Vorthak was saying, his translator making his voice sound like a confused accountant. "Small mammal, domesticated, suitable for enclosed habitats." I wanted to interrupt and explain that honey badgers weren't domesticated so much as temporarily contained, but my mom was already launching into her explanation of Buster's therapeutic benefits. She'd somehow convinced Earth's medical establishment that Buster helped with my anxiety, which was technically true, in the same way that a nuclear bomb helps with urban renewal projects. "He's very good with children," Mom was explaining to the increasingly bewildered alien officials. "Very protective. He has an excellent track record of resolving Jake's social difficulties." This was also technically true. Buster's method of resolving social difficulties usually involved removing the difficulty permanently, but the paperwork didn't specify methodology. The other students had started gathering to see the new arrival. Word travels fast in a space station when the weird human kid is getting a pet. I could see them whispering among themselves, probably placing bets on how long it would take Crack's to turn my emotional support animal into a chew toy. There was Nexia, a crystalline student who'd been one of Crax's frequent targets. Her species communicated through light refraction, and she was practically sparkling with curiosity. Grundle, a fungoid who'd tried to befriend me on my 2nd day before Crax made it clear that association with me was hazardous to one's health. Even some of the older students had shown up, probably expecting entertainment. "Can we see the Earth creature?" someone asked, and I realized with growing horror that they were all expecting some kind of reveal ceremony. Mom unlatched the carrier with the pride of someone unveiling a masterpiece. "Everyone, meet Buster." Buster emerged with the casual confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't bite his way through. He was about 30 pounds of compact muscle, black and white fur, and an expression that suggested he was rapidly calculating the threat level of everyone present. His little support animal vest made him look official and harmless, which was probably the most dangerous thing about the entire situation. The alien students made those universal cooing sounds that apparently transcended species. "Oh, how small and manageable," someone said. "Such a peaceful earth mammal." I watched Buster's ears twitch as he took in the sounds, smells, and general vibe of his new environment. His expression was the same one he'd worn right before he'd eliminated a family of raccoons who'd made the mistake of getting between him and his food bowl. It was the look of someone conducting a hostile takeover. "He's so cute," Nexia was saying, her crystalline structure refracting light in what I recognized as her species' version of delight. That's when I spotted Krax approaching through the crowd, and my blood went cold. The big saurid was grinning that terrifying grin of his, probably seeing an opportunity to establish dominance by threatening my pathetic earth rodent in front of the entire administrative staff. "Jake, human child," Krax rumbled, his voice carrying that casual menace I'd come to dread. "I see you brought tiny earth creature for protection. How amusing." I tried to catch Buster's attention, to somehow signal that now would be a great time to go back in the carrier and pretend to be a normal pet. But Buster was already watching Krax with the focused intensity of someone who'd just identified the alpha predator in the room and was making career decisions accordingly. "Very small," Krax continued, reaching one massive clawed hand toward Buster. "I wonder how tiny earth creature tastes." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the exact moment when Galactic Academy Station Omega-7 learned why honey badgers were banned from most civilized planets. What happened next unfolded with the beautiful, terrible precision of a natural disaster. You know that moment in old Earth movies where everything goes quiet right before the tornado hits? That's exactly what happened when Krax reached for Buster. The entire crowd went silent. Not just quiet, but that special kind of silence that happens when every living creature in a 3-meter radius simultaneously realizes they're about to witness something that will require therapy afterward. Buster looked up at Krax's approaching claw with the kind of casual interest you might show to a mildly entertaining television program. His head tilted slightly to one side, and I swear I could see the exact moment when he decided that this 12-foot dinosaur was about to become a learning experience for everyone involved. "Maybe we should," I started to say, because even though Krax was a psychopathic bully who'd made my life miserable, I didn't actually want to watch him get turned into educational material by 30 pounds of concentrated violence. Too late. Krax's claw made contact with Buster's head, probably intending to do that condescending pat-pat thing he'd done to me. Instead, what happened was that Buster exploded into motion like a furry landmine with anchor management issues. The first thing you need to understand about honey badgers is that they don't have a fight or flight response. They have a fight or fight harder response. The second thing you need to understand is that they're built like nature's answer to the question, what if a wolverine was angrier and had less regard for personal safety? Buster launched himself at Krax's hand with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been personally insulted by the concept of being touched without permission. His teeth found purchase somewhere between Krax's wrist and elbow, and suddenly the most feared predator in the school was making sounds I'd never heard before and hoped never to hear again. "What is this creature?" Krax roared, trying to shake Buster loose. This was his first mistake, because shaking a honey badger is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline-soaked newspapers. Buster's response was to climb higher up Krax's arm, using his claws for purchase and leaving what looked like little railroad tracks in the saurid's scales. The sound was like someone dragging a fork across the world's largest chalkboard, and every student in the vicinity was making their species equivalent of horrified gasping noises. "Jake, perhaps you should call your animal," Dean Vorthak suggested, with the kind of forced calm that indicated he was approximately 3 seconds away from a complete nervous breakdown. "You can't call a honey badger," I explained, watching in fascination as Buster established a secure position on Krax's shoulder and began what could only be described as aggressive conflict resolution. "They don't really do requests, they do hostile takeovers." Krax was spinning in circles now, trying to dislodge his unexpected passenger, while Buster held on with the determination of someone who'd never heard the phrase lost cause. The big saurid's claws were scrabbling at his own shoulder, but honey badgers are built like furry tanks, and Buster was staying put. "Get it off! Get it off!" Krax bellowed. And I realized with a kind of detached amazement that this was the first time I'd ever heard fear in his voice. That's when Zilf decided to help, which was mistake number 2 in what was rapidly becoming a masterclass in poor decision-making. The nebular floated down from his usual hovering position and extended one of his tentacle-like appendages toward Buster. Buster's reaction was immediate and educational. Without releasing his grip on Cracks, he twisted around and grabbed Zilf's appendage with his free paws. The sound Zilf made was like air being let out of a balloon that was also somehow screaming. Now we had a 12-foot dinosaur with a honey badger on his shoulder connected to a floating jellyfish who was making sounds that probably violated several noise ordinances. They were spinning around the administrative area like the galaxy's most violent carnival ride. Mordak, demonstrating the kind of loyalty that would have been admirable in literally any other situation, decided this was the perfect time to charge into the fray. A half-ton of walking granite thundered toward the spinning chaos, probably planning to grab Buster and end this quickly. Buster saw him coming and made a tactical decision that will probably be studied in military academies for generations to come. He released both Cracks and Zilf simultaneously, launched himself directly at Mordak's face, and began what I could only describe as aggressive landscape. The sound of claws on rock echoed through the station as Buster demonstrated that geological formations were just another type of terrain to be conquered. Mordak was staggering around, swinging his massive stone fists at something that was too small, too fast, and too angry to hit. By this point, the station's security had arrived. 5 different species of armed guards surrounded the chaos, weapons drawn, trying to figure out how to stop a 30-pound mammal who was currently redesigning a lithoid's facial structure. Stun weapons are ineffective, one of the guards reported. The creature appears to be immune to standard pacification protocols. Have you tried asking it nicely to stop? Another guard suggested. I almost felt bad for them. Here they were, trained professionals with advanced technology and years of experience, completely baffled by what was essentially an angry weasel with commitment issues. The fight, if you could call it that, lasted approximately 4 more minutes. Buster worked his way systematically through all 3 members of Crax's crew, leaving them in various states of defeat and disarray. Crax was curled up in a corner, nursing claw marks and what appeared to be a severely damaged ego. Zilf was deflated like a punctured balloon, making sad whistling noises. Mordak looked like someone had used him for rock climbing practice, which, technically speaking, someone had. Finally, Buster sat down in the middle of the administrative area, licked his paws clean, and looked around with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just completed a successful hostile takeover of a small corporation. The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that happens after natural disasters, when everyone's trying to process what they've just witnessed and figure out if they need to update their insurance policies. Well, my mom said cheerfully, apparently completely unfazed by the fact that her son's emotional support animal had just dismantled 3 apex predators in front of the entire school administration. I think Buster's gonna fit right in here. The aftermath of what the station's incident reports would eventually classify as the honey badger event was like watching an entire ecosystem reorganize itself around a new apex predator. And the new apex predator was currently sitting on my dorm room floor, methodically cleaning his claws and looking extremely pleased with himself. Crax spent 3 days in the medical bay, not because his injuries were life-threatening, but because the station's chief medical officer, a healing class empathic named Dr. Wellness, insisted he needed time to process the psychological trauma of being dominated by a creature 1/20th his size. The medical report, which somehow got leaked to the entire student body, included the phrase, "unprecedented damage to subject's sense of self-worth," and recommend extended therapy for apex predator identity crisis. Word of Buster's performance spread through the station faster than a computer virus written by angry teenagers. Within hours, I went from being that weird human kid who gets stuffed in lockers to the guy with the demon pet who ended the sordid reign of terror. The transformation in how other students treated me was like watching a nature documentary in fast forward. Nexia was the first to approach me the day after the incident. She found me in the library where I was trying to catch up on xenobiology homework, while Buster napped in a patch of artificial sunlight. "Jake Martinez," she said, her crystalline structure refracting light in what I'd learned was excitement. "Your companion creature. It displays unprecedented combat efficiency for its size category." "Yeah, Buster's pretty good at conflict resolution," I replied, watching as several other students who'd been studying quietly suddenly packed up their materials and moved to different tables. Apparently, even a sleeping honey badger had a intimidation radius. I have been victim of Crack's intimidation protocols for 2.3 academic cycles, Nexia continued, her light patterns shifting to what I recognized as gratitude. Your creature has eliminated this problem with 98.7% efficiency. That's when I realized something wonderful was happening. All around the library, students who'd been living under Crax's reign of terror were sitting up straighter, making eye contact, actually talking to each other instead of communicating in fearful whispers. Grundle the fungoid approached next, his mushroom-like form practically vibrating with excitement. Jake, my spore friend, your fierce companion has created what my species calls a dominance vacuum. The previous alpha has been decisively challenged and found wanting. This is unprecedented in station social dynamics. Over the next few days, I watched the school's entire social structure reorganize itself around the fact that the biggest bully in the galaxy had been taken down by what looked like a slightly cranky house pet. The former victims weren't just walking taller, they were forming study groups, starting clubs, and generally acting like people instead of prey animals. The most dramatic change was in the cafeteria. For months, lunch had been a carefully choreographed dance of submission, with everyone trying to avoid Crax's attention while he held court at the center table. Now, that same table was occupied by a rotating group of students from different species, all chatting and sharing food like normal teenagers. Crax, when he finally returned from medical leave, tried to reclaim his territory exactly once. He walked into the cafeteria with his usual swagger, saw Buster sitting calmly next to my lunch tray, and immediately pivoted toward a table in the far corner. The entire room watched this tactical retreat in stunned silence. I believe the human phrase is "new sheriff in town," Grundle whispered to Nexia, who sparkled with what I was pretty sure was laughter. But the really entertaining part was watching the other students' attempts to bring their own emotional support animals to school. Apparently half the galaxy had been taking notes on Earth's bureaucratic loopholes. Velix, a Raptorian student, showed up with something that looked like a miniature dragon and insisted it was for anxiety management. The creature immediately got into a territorial dispute with one of the cleaning drones and set a trash receptacle on fire. The administration quickly implemented new policies regarding therapeutic flame-based companions. A crystalline student named Prism brought what they claimed was a support mineral that turned out to be a semi-sentient crystal formation with abandonment issues. It kept trying to bond with the station's structural supports and had to be removed by engineering crews when it started interfering with life support systems. The best attempt came from Zilf, who'd apparently recovered from his encounter with Buster and decided that if humans could bring predators to school, he could too. He showed up with a comfort creature that looked like a cross between a jellyfish and octopus, floating beside him in its own portable atmosphere bubble. "This is my emotional support tentacula," he announced to the admissions committee. "Very peaceful, very supportive." The tentacula lasted exactly 6 hours before it tried to establish dominance over the cafeteria serving system. Buster, who'd apparently appointed himself the station's unofficial peacekeeping force, took one look at the situation and delivered a brief but educational seminar on why there was only room for one apex predator in this school. The incident report from that encounter was classified, but rumors suggested it involved the tentacula being stuffed into its own atmosphere bubble and used as an impromptu balloon by a honey badger who'd clearly been studying creative problem-solving techniques. After that, the administration quietly updated the emotional support animal policies to include a clause about creatures that do not challenge the established peacekeeping hierarchy. Everyone understood this meant, don't bring anything that might annoy Jake's honey badger. The most unexpected development was how genuinely effective Buster actually was as emotional support. Having a honey badger on your side, it turned out, was incredibly therapeutic for anxiety management. Not because he was cuddly or comforting in any traditional sense, but because when you knew that 30 pounds of concentrated fury had your back, the normal social pressures of teenage life suddenly seemed a lot less intimidating. My grades improved, my social life expanded to include actual friends instead of just fellow victims. I started participating in class discussions instead of trying to make myself invisible. It turned out that confidence was a lot easier to develop when you had a weaponized mammal providing backup. The best part was watching Buster settle into his new role as the station's unofficial enforcer. He'd established a daily patrol routine, wandering the corridors and common areas with the casual authority of someone conducting security inspections. Other students would nod respectfully as he passed, and he'd acknowledge them with the kind of professional courtesy you'd expect from a very small, very dangerous sheriff. Bullying incidents dropped to 0 station-wide. Not because there was some new policy or intervention program, but because every potential bully knew that somewhere on the station was a honey badger who'd made it his personal mission to maintain order through aggressive negotiation. And the truly beautiful thing? Buster seemed to genuinely enjoy his work. He'd found his calling as a peacekeeping force in an environment where his particular skill set was not only useful, but essential. He was, in the most literal sense possible, a successful emotional support animal. He just happened to provide that support through strategic intimidation and occasional violence. 3 months after the cafeteria incident, I realized I hadn't been stuffed in a locker, had my lunch money stolen, or been threatened by anyone in weeks. My anxiety levels were lower than they'd been since elementary school, and for the first time in my academic career, I was actually looking forward to going to class. All thanks to 30 pounds of attitude in an official support animal vest, who'd turned out to be exactly the kind of emotional support I'd needed all along. 4 years later, I stood on the observation deck of Galactic Academy Station Omega 7, wearing a graduation cap that had been specially modified to accommodate human head shapes, watching ships arrive for the ceremony. My parents were somewhere in that traffic jam of interstellar vehicles, probably arguing with space traffic control about parking regulations in 17 different languages. Buster sat beside me, wearing his own tiny graduation cap that my mom had insisted on ordering. At this point, he was practically a legend on the station. First-year students got orientation lectures that included a section called Understanding the Peacekeeping Mammal and Appropriate Interactions with Enforcement Fauna. The handbook now featured a full-page photo of Buster, under the heading Station Security Partners. "You know," I said to him, "when I first got here I thought this place was going to kill me. Turns out it just needed better management." Buster made that satisfied huffing sound that meant he agreed with my assessment of his administrative skills. Over the past 4 years he'd refined his peacekeeping techniques from immediate overwhelming violence to strategic displays of force with occasional educational demonstrations. He'd become something like a guidance counselor who happened to have claws and a complete disregard for the chain of command. The changes to the station's culture had been remarkable to watch unfold in slow motion. What started as one honey badger solving one bullying problem had cascaded into a complete transformation of how students interacted with each other. Bullying didn't just disappear, it became actively uncool. Nobody wanted to be the person who got visited by the peacekeeping mammal for behavioral correction. But the real changes went deeper than just fear-based compliance. Students who'd spent years walking around in survival mode suddenly had the mental energy to focus on actual learning. Study groups flourished. Interspecies friendships developed. The academic performance of the entire station improved dramatically once nobody was spending their processing power on threat assessment and escape route planning. My own transformation had been just as dramatic. The terrified 14-year-old who'd arrived here speaking in whispers and trying to become invisible had evolved into someone who could give presentations to mixed-species audiences without breaking into a cold sweat. I'd been elected to student government, joined the Xenobiology Club, and somehow ended up as editor of the station newsletter, which now featured a regular column called Ask the Peacekeeping Mammal, where Buster's behavior was analyzed for conflict resolution insights. The newsletter had become wildly popular throughout the galaxy's academic community. Educational institutions across 17 star systems now subscribed to read about our innovative approaches to social hierarchy management and non-traditional therapeutic intervention strategies. There were universities offering graduate courses in applied honey badger theory and small mammal conflict resolution protocols. But the thing I was proudest of wasn't the academic recognition or the transformed school culture. It was watching what happened to the other students who'd been victims when I first arrived. Nexia had become the station's first crystalline student council president, her confidence growing until she practically blazed with authority. She'd started a peer mediation program that was so successful other schools were sending delegations to study her methods. During her acceptance speech, she'd specifically thanked the human Jake Martinez and his companion Buster for demonstrating that size is not correlated with impact. Grundle had discovered a talent for biochemistry and was heading to the Galactic Institute of Technology on a full scholarship. He'd spent his final year developing what he called confidence spores, a kind of psychological therapy for his species that helped other fungoids overcome social anxiety. His thesis paper was titled From Substrate to Success, a Mycological Approach to Personal Growth, and it had been accepted for publication in 3 major scientific journals. Even some of the former bullies had undergone remarkable transformations. Mordak had apparently taken his encounter with Buster as a learning experience in humility and had spent 2 years in what his species called philosophical restructuring. He'd become fascinated with conflict resolution theory and was planning to study interspecies diplomacy. His senior thesis was called When Immovable Objects Meet Unstoppable Forces, a Personal Journey in Perspective Adjustment. Crax had taken a different path. After his extended stay in therapy, he'd discovered that his aggression issues stemmed from what sordid psychologists called apex predator identity confusion. Apparently, being raised as the biggest, scariest thing in every room had left him completely unprepared for encounters with creatures who simply didn't care about his size advantage. The therapeutic process had been long and occasionally dramatic, but by our junior year he'd emerged as a completely different reptile. He'd found his calling in protective services, using his natural intimidation abilities to defend smaller students instead of terrorizing them. The transformation was so complete that he'd been hired as a security consultant by 3 different educational institutions who wanted to implement their own reformed apex predator programs. His business cards read, Crax Security Solutions, Size Matters, Direction Matters More. The ceremony itself was a magnificent spectacle of interspecies cooperation and administrative efficiency. Dean Vorthak, who'd somehow survived 4 years of honey badger-induced policy changes, delivered a speech about embracing unexpected solutions to persistent problems while carefully avoiding direct eye contact with Buster. When my name was called, I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, with Buster trotting beside me, his tiny graduation cap slightly askew. The entire audience erupted in what I can only describe as polite but enthusiastic applause from dozens of different species. Someone in the back started what sounded like a Zephyrian war chant, which was apparently their version of cheering. But the real highlight came when Dean Vorthak presented Buster with his own honorary certificate, recognizing his exceptional contributions to campus safety and innovative approaches to social dynamics management. The honey badger accepted this honor with the dignified bearing of someone who'd always known he was destined for greatness, even if the rest of us had taken a while to catch up. After the ceremony, as families and friends mingled in the reception area, I found myself in a quiet corner with my acceptance letter to Galactic University. The packet was thick with course catalogs and housing information, but the detail that made me smile was right there on the first page. Approved emotional support animal, Buster Martinez. Status, pre-authorized for campus residence. Apparently Buster's reputation had preceded him. The university's student services office had sent a separate letter explaining their enhanced accommodation protocols for high-impact therapeutic companions, and assuring me that their campus security team had been briefed on appropriate interaction procedures with enforcement-capable support animals. I showed the letter to Buster, who examined it with the kind of professional interest you'd expect from someone reviewing his next assignment. Then he looked up at me with an expression that clearly said, "Well, of course they pre-authorized me. I'm obviously qualified." And that's when it hit me, the real lesson of my time at Galactic Academy Station Omega 7. Humans might not be the biggest, strongest, or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. We might not have natural armor, enhanced sensory capabilities, or built-in weapons systems. But we had something that turned out to be just as valuable. We were really, really good at making friends with things that were completely unreasonable. We had a talent for looking at the galaxy's most inappropriate creatures and thinking, you know what? That could work. Most species saw a honey badger and thought dangerous wild animal. Humans saw the same creature and thought emotional support partner with aggressive conflict resolution capabilities. Most species would try to contain or avoid something like Buster. Humans would fill out the paperwork to make him legally our problem. And somehow, that uniquely human combination of bureaucratic creativity and questionable judgment had turned out to be exactly what the galaxy's educational system needed. As I watched Buster holding court with a group of first-year students who were asking him about his career in peacekeeping, I realized that my mom had been right all along. He really had helped with my anxiety and adjustment challenges. He'd just done it by reorganizing the entire social structure of an interstellar educational institution and establishing himself as the galaxy's most unlikely guidance counselor. The best part? According to my acceptance packet, Galactic University had a bullying problem they'd been trying to solve for decades. Something about a gang of titanium-class lithoids who'd been making life miserable for smaller students. I looked down at Buster, who was now wearing his graduation cap at what I can only describe as a jaunty angle. "Ready for your next assignment, partner?" His tail wagged once, and I swear I could see him calculating the tactical advantages of a university-sized environment. 30 pounds of concentrated attitude, 4 years of experience in educational peacekeeping, and a completely legitimate emotional support animal certification. Yeah, I was pretty sure Galactic University had no idea what was about to hit them, and I was absolutely certain they were going to be better for it.